So let's start it now. I'm confirming that we're going live. You're live. Vas-y.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We wish to welcome you to our UN Pension Fund Global Meeting. We wish also to wish everybody happy Mother's Day. It was yesterday. Happy Ascension for this week, and happy Ramadan for our Muslim brothers and sisters around the world. Today's meeting is one of many meetings that the UN participant representative in the pension board and in the UN staff pension committees have been holding due to our obligation as fiduciaries of the participants and beneficiaries to the pension board, the duty to communicate and to maintain constant contact with those we represent. For today's meeting, this will be the plan. First, we will be having the pension board members, Mr. Ian Richards, who is going to be talking from Geneva, Michelle Rockcliffe from New York, and Mary Abu Rakabe from the Palestinian communities and Israel. The agenda would be threefold. The first part would be the address of the board members. First, Michelle is going to be addressing the hearing by talking about the improvement in the pension benefit plan in our defined benefits scheme and on investment matters. Second, Ms. Mary Abu Rakabe will be talking about the issues of staff working in the field and how we as board members have been servicing them. And finally, Mr. Ian Richards from Geneva will be addressing this gathering by talking about the governance issues at the pension board and the reform of the board itself. So I'm going to start first by giving the floor to Ms. Michelle Rockcliffe, participant representative. Michelle, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahima. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, fellow members of the UN Pension Fund. Today, I will talk about some of the main concerns, hopes, and visions for our fund held by UN participants' representatives on the UN Staff Pension Committee, or the UNSPC, as we call it. As reaffirmed by the independent entity Mosaic, which reviewed the governance of our fund in 2020, it is the fiduciary duty of all board members to have undivided and equal loyalty to the fund's beneficiaries. The duty to limit the fund's expenses to amounts that are reasonable and appropriate, and the exercise of care, skill, and diligence in our activities. While UN participant representatives are clear about these duties, it is not clear that these principles have been accepted by board members from governing bodies and executive heads. In fact, there is some sort of allegiance to member organizations who are not beneficiaries of the fund. This must be resolved. For 4 years, we have fought to ensure that all participants, and not only some, keep the right to oversee their own pension fund as board members. For 3 years, the General Assembly has resisted the push by those representing a minority to exclude staff members of the fund and staff pension committees from exercising this right, which we have always had as shareholders of our fund. It is time for the Assembly to stop hedging and to put this ridiculous discussion to rest, and to request the removal of unlawful rules created in 2017, which do not line up with the fund's regulations. To decide pension for all against the amendment to Article 6, which would result in disenfranchisement of at least several hundred participants. Why is it that some prefer not to have board members who know exactly what is happening in our pension fund? Why, even amid management assertions of elimination of waste and improved service, wouldn't fellow shareholders want to have the experience of their own pension experts, colleagues in the Pension Fund Administration and Office of Investments, sharing their knowledge of the truth, their professional views on the culture, the budget, performance, unnecessary spending, and other issues that prevent our fund from being the best in class? Who better than fund staff who, like you, have a vested interest in the success of our fund? When I began working at the fund in 1992, the value of our assets was $9 billion. As of the 30th of April 2021, we were an $85.1 billion pension fund. But perhaps if the board were paying more attention to the benchmarks and performance and following up on recommendations made by OIOS regarding our fixed income portfolio, we would now have $86.3 billion instead of $85.1. And why does it matter a billion here or a billion there? Because when the fund shows consistent surplus, the board can propose reinstatement of certain increases to the pension, which had been suspended as austerity measures since the 1980s. For example, since 1983, 1.5% had been reduced from the first cost of living adjustments to pensions. In each of 2005 and 2007, retirees received rebates of 0.5%. But it is now 2021, 14 years since, and about time that the remaining 0.5% is returned to beneficiaries. Another measure taken in the 80s was to delay cost of living adjustments on deferred benefits from age 50 to instead start when a beneficiary reached age 55. Consistent surpluses would enable the Assembly to restore these adjustments. And what about improvements to our pension, our defined pension plan? Year after year, the board has decided to deny a proposal that would allow those who made the choice to defer their benefits under Article 30 the ability to restore the service if they return to employment in a member organization. Such a measure only seems fair since in circumstances where the fund deems a benefit deferred, the restoration is allowed. Another improvement could be to start the additional 10%. I'm being told that they're not hearing me. I do have my volume up to 95. Okay, I'll continue and hope for the best. Are we recording?
Yes, Michelle, the meeting is being recorded.
I'm not seeing the record button on, but okay. Okay. Another improvement could be to start the additional 10% interest under Article 31 after 4 years of service instead of after 5 years. Most staff do not contribute to national schemes and therefore would not receive unemployment benefits in the case of termination of their fixed-term UN appointments. This is important, most especially with the talk of agile contracts. And isn't it time to increase the small pension adjustment to provide a living benefit to those retiring at the lowest levels of the general service salary scale? We need the fund to be robust and healthy and as efficient as possible so as to improve the retirement benefits of international civil servants, not to grace the pockets of external managers and unnecessary consultants, or to pay the same counterparties hefty commissions year after year. We have always been able to manage our fund internally for the most part, and the Office of Investments should do the necessary to modernize, develop our internal capacity, and continue to operate in a lean and profitable manner while keeping risk at the minimum. And if the pension fund is not doing the necessary oversight, who is? Over the past 4 years, my colleagues and I on the UN Staff Pension Committee have reviewed, awarded, and defended more than 800 cases of disability, including for disabled children. We believe member organizations must do better in the case of mental health of international civil servants and ensure equitable opportunity to survive in financial dignity for those under age 55 who are deemed incapacitated to work in a member organization, but need activity for therapy or simply to continue to provide for their families. We have also reviewed cases where former and active participants appealed the decisions of the chief executive. While for the most part decisions are made correctly applying the regulations, we find that there is no recourse when in fact, due to errors or omissions on the pension fund administration, participants or retirees end up losing certain entitlements. In these cases, even though not very frequent, individual participants and their survivors sadly lose thousands of dollars in entitlement through no fault of their own, even after dutiful service to the organization for decades. In our view, the tribunal has not been provided a full understanding of the additional fiduciary duty of care that lies in the fund as UNSPC, and instead of remanding cases for further review in certain instances, it has strictly applied the regulations to the detriment of appellants. We have brought to the attention of our colleagues from the General Assembly and the Secretary General representatives that the best place the fund's administrative errors to be corrected is by evaluation of the pension committee. In peer organizations, there is a legal officer serving the board who actually advocates on behalf of the appellant. In the case of the UNJSPF, this is left to us, the participants' representatives. Our group is coming to the end of its mandate, and hopefully a few of us will be re-elected to continue the work we have done to gain equitable 2/3 representation on the board for UN family participants and better overall oversight for the fund. As of today, my plan is the same as it was 4 years ago, to retire at least on time, and therefore do not plan to run for re-election. I implore you all, carefully consider our candidates for their competence, their previous experience, and attitudes to our fund and its participants. This is not a popularity contest. It is serious business that requires much dedication and time and affects all of us for the rest of our lives and the lives of our loved ones after we are gone. Thank you for your continued support as we fight for our fund. Back to you, Ibrahim.
Thank you, Michelle, for this presentation. The second speaker of today's will be Miss Mary Abu Rakabe. Mary, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahima, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Actually, now my turn to talk about the United Nations participants representatives support to participants and their beneficiaries in the field and around the globe. So we have been really working hard to support participants and their representatives, and we intended to reduce the effect of the backlog. We always have been working really hard that colleagues, whoever separate or retire, get their payments and get their benefits in maximum 30 days. As you know, there's a lot of backlog, and we have been working hard since 2016, trying to reduce this big number of backlog, and we have been working into two tracks. The first track is that we have presented a paper to the pension board in 2016-2018, and we requested that in its 64th session that the pension board approves individuals to get a benefit from partial payments. What does partial payments mean? Partial payments mean that we have been trying to work hard in making sure that whoever separates from the pension or from their organization gets their payment on time. In case something happens, they're not able to submit all the needed documents, all the needed forms, the needed papers, the pension should also take that into consideration and give them partial payments of 80% of their money. Because as you all know, the money you have in the pension, the money is yours. Now, some processes delays. In some cases, some people live in the field and far away. They don't have access to internet. They cannot send or provide the official documents or original papers. Luckily now in the COVID, at least something good happened, that we managed to change and send documents by email or electronically. But as you all know, previously we had to hand the original documents. So the participant representatives have been raising this issue hardly. So you get your money on time, at least get the partial payment. So we have been discussing this issue one more time again in the last UNSPC meeting that took place last week, and we hopefully are getting the support from the UNSPC that we submit or resubmit the same paper to the pension board, hoping that we get this approval. So people, we really know how hard you work. We really know how bad you feel when you have no income. After separation, after retirement, we know that you take care of all your families, all the beneficiaries, children. So we know and we feel with you. Once you stop your, you stop your salary, you need an income. And this is why we work hard all these years to the minute that when we need this money, we can get it on time. So this is what we've been working hard on. We want to guarantee that you get your money on time. On the other issue, which is the second track that I've been have been talking about, is the the United Nations participants representative also have been working hardly on publishing the names of the information for the colleagues who separated, and the pension was not able to reach them. Many colleagues around the globe in very far away areas in the field have served for years, and then due to lack of some information or documents, they were disappeared and we weren't able to reach them. So this money needs to go to their owners. We have been following up hardly and making sure that the fund provide the names of all these people to all the agencies for them to distribute the names and have them, contact them. The issue is that the fund has not been really trying to find people, and that's why we want every single person who owes money to the fund should get their money. So the names are normally distributed to all agencies and to AFIX. This has been, we've been feeling that there is progress in this, but unfortunately, couple of weeks ago, a list of names with their UN IDs or the unique IDs were published, which is breaching confidentiality, and this is not acceptable. And then we noticed this really very quickly on the spot, and we stopped it. So please make sure that we have, we are backing you up, we are supporting you, we are making sure wherever you are in the field, far away, have access, no access, that you get your money on time in maximum 30 days. We're working hard to make sure that you get partial payments in case you don't have all your papers and documents submitted. And in case, and this is another call to everyone who's there attending us and knows about someone who didn't get their money and they know anything about that person, please get in touch with us. You have our emails, you have our names, you can call us, you can write to us. We are always there for you. So I hope that we can continue for this next submission for the board and guarantee all your benefits to be given on time. Thank you, Ibrahim, and over to you.
Thank you, Mary, for this great presentation. Now we are going to give the floor to Mr. Ian Richards, board member as well, who will be talking about the reforms that are underway and also about the investment of the fund. Ian, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim, and hello, everybody. I'm based in Geneva, also in Tunisia at the moment. So it's nice to see everyone, and happy Ramadan, of course, to everyone as well. So we've got quite a few issues to go through. I'm starting by talking about the governance issues. And I think that's very important because it's at the root of how this fund is run. So just a quick summary, the pension fund, you have a pension administration that takes your money in and pays it out and makes sure it's done correctly. You have an office investment that invests that money to try and get a return in order to finance the pensions. And you also now have a unit that services the board, and that's something that we created, and we'll be coming to that. Now, the board itself is 30, if you look at the pension fund regulations, and they're on the pension fund website, it's 33 members. But in fact, we'll see that it's much bigger. It's around 90 people because of various things that have happened over the years. They meet once a year and for about 1 or 1.5 weeks a year. So we feel that this isn't enough because the pension board is responsible for many things. It's responsible for making sure you get paid. And indeed, when Mary talked about the backlog that we had a few years ago, where people had to wait up to 9 months just to get their pension paid, the board have been neglectful in addressing that and in holding the head of the fund at the time to account. So it's important. So you can see the governance is important for making sure you get paid. It's important for making sure that people in the field are catered for, especially because of the UN, they're in very distant places. It's important for making sure that the rules aren't being changed on the sly, which has been happening in the last few years. We've seen suddenly the pension fund rules were changed and it was never approved by anyone. So as board members, we've been able to deal with that. It's important because it has to ensure there's good leaders and that leaders are held to account. And I'll talk a bit about that as well. And it's important about ensuring that the pension fund is a good place for people to work. So we continue to attract the best and the brightest to work at our pension fund. So we feel that the governance is at the root of everything about the pension fund and making sure that you get paid the right amount and on time. So as I said, the board's supposed to be 33 people, but in fact, it is something closer to 90 people meeting once a year for 1 week. So we thought for a fund that's managing, responsible for $65 billion, now $80 billion of your money, this seems a bit strange. Even the sort of the social committees or the football club at your workplace probably meets about once a month. So why is this huge pension fund only meeting once a year? And that got us into a discussion about, what should a pension fund really be doing? Or what should a pension board really be doing if it wants to assume its responsibilities? So we looked at what other pension funds are doing, and we saw that most of them meet quarterly, sometimes monthly. They're generally about 15 members, 15, not 90 members, 90. They're usually the members are voted on in relation to how many people are participating in that fund, which is unlike the UN pension fund, where 2/3 of those participating in the fund are you, your 2/3, and the specialized agencies contribute 1/3, but the specialized agencies have 2/3 of the votes on the board, and the UN has 1/3 of the votes on the board, which means that even though we're the majority in the fund, we're always a minority when it comes to voting. So normal pension funds don't have that. They have a clear connection between how much you participate and what your representation is on the board, and that's important. So those were a number of things where we saw there was a clear disconnect. And as I said, it meant that the board wasn't doing its job down the years. Things were going astray. People weren't being paid. Money was being spent irresponsibly, and so forth. So we raised this issue in a number of areas, a number of fora, and the General Assembly, as a result, asked OIOS, the Office of Internal Oversight Services, to conduct a study to see how does the pension fund compare, the governance of the pension fund compare to other pension funds. And they came to very similar conclusions as we did. They took a very top-level team there, did a lot of work. They came to very similar conclusions. And they added that there was, by speaking to members of the pension board, they felt that many of the pension board members, and Michelle mentioned this earlier, did not have a sense of responsibility or fiduciary responsibility. So they didn't understand what their role was. And indeed, that confirmed for what we found as well. For us, the role of a pension board member is that you're entrusted with making sure that the pension fund operates correctly on behalf of everyone who's putting money into the pension fund. But we felt that for some of them saw it simply as a nice trip to go on once a year to an exotic location, and they weren't really taking their responsibilities seriously. So that was also picked up by OIOS. So OIOS published a report. There was huge pushback, and someone mentioned that in the comments as well. There was a huge pushback from the board who said, how dare you tell us how to do our job? We know better than anyone else, even though we don't run the board like most other boards are run, but we know better than everyone else. And OIS, go disappear. The GA didn't like that. The General Assembly was very unhappy with that reaction. So they then asked a private consultancy firm that looks into pension funds called Mosaic to do a report. And Mosaic did a report, and they reached, unsurprisingly, a very similar conclusion. The board is too big, it doesn't meet often enough, it's not agile, it doesn't react, it doesn't foresee what's coming down the road, and it's letting down the participants of the pension fund, i.e. you. However, the General Assembly then came back, so the board again said, we don't trust Mosaic, they're not the right people, their decisions and recommendations are all flawed, we should ignore them, and Mosaic, you go away as well. But what happened this year is the General Assembly came down very strong, and they said to the board, no, you have to take this seriously, we're not giving you another chance. Either you show us how you're going to reform in order to match yourself to best practices out there, or we're going to do it for you. So what's happening now is that the pension board is having a very intense discussion. There was a special board meeting in February. There's various working groups looking at this. And I think they're starting to take it more seriously, that maybe they need to change how they work. So we may be seeing, there's a lot of compromise on this pension board. There's a lot of people who like the status quo, but we may be seeing more frequent meetings, perhaps 3 times a year, even though we would like at least 4 times a year. We may be seeing a smaller board as well, perhaps 1/3 down from what it is at the moment. It's still big, but it's better than before. The proportions are still a concern, so we have to keep working on that. But we're confident that by acting by making the board more in line with what a board should be, more aware of its responsibilities and more agile, we'll be able to get a better performance on the board. So that is one of the big things that the board has been working on, or we have been working on in the last 4 years. Parallel to this, there's been 2 issues. Michelle alluded to one, which was attempts by the board to prevent pension fund staff from running for the board and being elected on the board. Several times they tried to exclude pension fund staff from the board who were elected. We went to the UN Appeals Tribunal to appeal that and won. Each time UNAT said you cannot exclude people from the board. So now majority of members on the board are going to the General Assembly and trying to lobby the General Assembly in order to exclude those members. So we've been working on that to protect pension fund staff. But because the pension fund or the pension board kept losing at UNAT because they're breaking the rules, they're now lobbying the General Assembly to change the rules of the pension fund so that the pension board is removed from the oversight of UNAT, of the UN Appeals Tribunal. So they want to move the pension fund out of any legal jurisdiction so that if something is done wrong, there's no way that anyone can go and appeal it. And we're very concerned about that because we feel that an 80 billion pension fund needs to have a clear legal framework around it and a clear way of enforcing that legal framework. So we, 3 times I think so far, the General Assembly has rejected this proposal, and we have to keep making sure that that remains the case. Now I'll talk about the investments. There's been a lot of comments about how do we green the investments, how does the pension fund become more ESG, that's environmental, social and governance. So as I mentioned, we're a fund of 80 billion, and there are obviously a lot of concerns from colleagues who are saying, you know, we need to make sure that the investment of the pension fund reflect UN values. We don't want to be enriching ourselves from something that we are working against or don't believe in, or that's contributing massively to climate change or something like this. So we've been hearing that a lot, and we've been working a lot on this, and we've been trying to move on that. At the same time, we see that there's a concern from the pension fund that they want to meet their targets, which means that they have to have 3.5% real rate of return on their investments. When I say real rate of return, that means once you've taken out inflation. If you don't remove inflation, they're going on average for 6%. So they need to generate a return on investments, but at the same time, we want to make sure that that investment is done in a correct way and isn't done in any way that would harm human rights or the environment and so forth. So it creates a tension, and there's always going to be that tension in any investment strategy. But what we've managed to get with the fund, of course, now doesn't invest in tobacco. It doesn't invest in what's called controversial weapons. That means they still, and we asked about that. Why? What is controversial as opposed to uncontroversial weapons? So apparently an uncontroversial weapon is a plane or something like this. And apparently aerospace companies and shipping companies and so forth work on the civilian side, but they also work on the military side. And this is what makes it a bit complicated. They've also announced that they pulled out of thermal coal. That was in 2019. I'm not sure we were that invested in thermal coal, but they plugged this as a sort of an achievement, so good for them. But the question really is, how can we go further? How can we pursue this ESG? And we have been pushing. And after considerable pushing, it's good to see that in 2019, they actually published a report on that. We felt, I mean, there's a lot in there, but actually, at the end of the day, it's still a bit light. So we want more. So we have had many discussions with the Office of Investment Management. The issue we understand as well is not straightforward, of course, because you see the fund, I think in 6 years ago, made a big announcement. The head of investments at the time went and rang the closing bell or opening bell or whichever one on Wall Street, and to announce that the fund was investing in low carbon funds, ETFs, exchange traded funds from BlackRock. Now, some of you may have read the media over the last couple of weeks, and there's actually BlackRock has been in a lot of scandals because its low carbon funds are apparently not so low carbon. So I think there was good intentions there from the part of the pension fund, but they perhaps we didn't see what was being hidden underneath the surface. And it becomes very difficult because there's a lot of demand for anything that's rated positively as ESG. And so where there's a lot of money in something, there's obviously going to be a lot of manipulation and fraud as well. And if you look at how this is structured, it is complicated. So, for example, if you want to invest in green energy, increasingly green energy is being bought up by fossil fuel companies because they want to improve their ESG rating. So it means that if you want to invest in solar panels, it sometimes has to be done through fossil fuels. So we're probably going to see more and more fossil fuel companies buying up green energy companies precisely for that reason. So this muddies the water somewhat. We also look at the social side. For example, if you take a pharmaceutical company, are they positive because they found a vaccine for COVID, or are they rated negatively because they're refusing to give away the intellectual property to other companies? We've also seen that there's a lot of questions about how some of these ESG rating agencies are rating funds. You'll remember what happened before the housing crisis in 2008. A lot of these rating agencies were found to be turning a blind eye, not doing their job properly, and giving positive ratings to funds that had actually negative and were actually very highly risky. And the same thing is happening for ESG. So it's something that we're still, I think there's still quite a bit of work on, but obviously there's a lot that can be done, and we're pushing for a lot of progress to be done in that area. And I think that the new head of investments is much more aware of this and more on board with this agenda than his predecessors. With regards to a couple of other issues, and Mary mentioned about the backlog, but there's been further questions about that. Just to add to what she said, as you said, when we first came in, if you retired, you had to wait up to 9 months to get your first payment. And that was an atrocious situation for many of you, particularly those who are on lower incomes, didn't have the savings there, or were in more vulnerable situations. So As Mary said, we did a lot of work on that, particularly in terms of changing the leadership. And we were in the minority in the board on this at the start, and we really had to work hard to persuade other board members that waiting 9 months to get your first pension was not acceptable. Some said, well, you know, that's it, that's how life is. And we said, no, you should be paid as soon as you retire. You should not have to wait for 9 months. People can make a baby in 9 months, you know. So we got rid of the CEO. I mean, we pushed him out in a way, as the things are done at the UN, but he left at the end. Got rid of his deputy. We've twice got rid of the heads of investment, and we have a new head of pension administration, who is from Canada, who's worked in a lot of pension funds before and is hopefully therefore less political and more focused on actual work and the mechanics of it, which is a good thing. There's a new deputy, there's a new head of investments, and there's now a new secretary to the board as well, because we felt that previously there was a conflict of interest, that the head of the fund was also secretary to the board and was therefore manipulating the board. So we're able to separate those roles out. We made it a priority to reduce the backlog. We worked with the head of management of UN at the time, who was Mr. Takasu, to do that. We improved cooperation, we pushed to improve cooperation with human resources. And we worked to move certain processes online as well, but further could be done. So we feel there's still more to be done, because now, if you're lucky, you get paid within 15 days. That's what we're hearing in the best of cases. But as Mary said, it's harder if you're in the field, and it's harder if you're in certain situations. So we still feel that more work needs to be done with HR units and staff, so that everyone knows what documents to submit and when. We also feel, as Mary said, that even if you don't have, if the pension fund hasn't received all the documents, it still has enough to be able to at least make a first payment to tide you over. And we feel there's more that can be done with the current functionalities to put things online, but also to automate certain processes, so that if they don't receive the documents, you should receive an automatic reminder, even something as basic as that they can do, but they're not doing. We also feel that there could be more work to be done to make it more clear how the process works, but also to count and measure how the backlog is, because different parts of the fund are measuring the time it takes to process your pension to make the first payment differently. And we had suspicions about this, and this was confirmed by an audit, which showed that in some cases, if they didn't have all the documents, they didn't pause the clock, they restarted it completely. So they were under-reporting the amount of time that staff had to wait. So we've had to sort of approach this from a lot of different angles, and I think we're getting somewhere. Michelle also talked about reforms and changes to the entitlements, and she's been doing a lot of work on the disability issue. And one of the issues, if someone goes on disability and then partially comes back into the workforce, how much money can they earn before the disability pension is reduced? And we feel that even partially working in the workforce is a good thing, and it shouldn't be an occasion to totally take away your disability pension, because you're trying to make an effort, and it's also important for your mental health. But we've also been pushing back on attempts to take away pensions from widows, from children, and so forth. And there's a lot of work still to do with that, and there's a task force working on that right now. So that's all from me for now, and I put you back to Ibrahim, who is our moderator.
Thank you, Ian, for this very good presentation of yours. Now we are going to open the floor first for the attendees, if they have questions, so that the board member can answer to them. But first, I would like to thank those participant representatives who are absent today. Ms. Aissatou Dieng from Dakar. She was not able to attend this meeting, but her work, especially in the audit committee, is of importance to us. The other board member who also left the group is Ms. Bernadette Nyiratunga from Nairobi. Bernadette retired in the end of 2020. So she is no longer with us, but we also wish to take this occasion to thank her for her good job during the past 4 years in uniting the group, and also in contributing in various capacities at the board session. So Bernadette, we wish you a good retirement, and we thank you for your contribution during the past 4 years. Now we are going to open the floor for those who are participating in this meeting to have an opportunity to address either through contribution or through specific question to our board members. Thank you. Ian, you could.
Okay, so Ibrahim, but basically we have a lot of questions are now being published on the chat. So colleagues are encouraged to publish that. So we've got quite a lot of questions there. Maybe I'll go through some of them, and other colleagues might want to go through them as well. We're publishing the questions that relate very much to the agenda of this meeting. We cannot really get into discussion about, if I'm retiring at this age and this year and what happens with my entitlements, because that's something that the pension fund, we're not mandated to answer those, and that you have to contact the pension fund. And if you go to unjspf.org, which is the website, there is a contact us section, and it's all there. But of course, we hear the concerns, and many of you have actually said it, that it's sometimes not easy to get in contact or get a reply from the pension fund, and that's something which we're working on. It's got better, but there's certainly more work to be done. We've had quite a few questions on ESG, but also someone asks about how is the 3.5% calculated. So the answer to that is they have an actuaries who do a study, and they say in order for the pension fund to continue paying out and making sure that everyone can be paid, and making assumptions about how long UN staff live before they die. This is how much we have to pay out. This is how much is coming in, and therefore this is the rate of return that is required to maintain that same set of benefits. We have a question. Mosaic, the independent consultants, have said that there are many deficiencies in the board compared to other boards, yet members of the board are not supportive of implementing its recommendations. What real chance do we have for improvements in fund oversight and governance? So again, that's something we mentioned. We're pushing with the GA. I think the GA has understood there needs to be reforms if the pension fund is continued to survive, and so we are working very hard on that. Yeah.
Can I add to that, Ian?
I'm putting you on.
Thanks. When it comes to our peers and to the recommendations by Mosaic, the independent entity, when we looked into the peers, we actually see, for example, that in many public pension funds, as we are, that even the board meetings are open to participants and retirees. And it's so far the most of the board can only come up with perhaps having an annual general meeting. However, I think in the interest of transparency, perhaps it should be considering these open board meetings. I mean, if you were to just go to YouTube right now, you might be able, and you say pension board meeting, you might be able to see a number of meetings, for example, California State or New Jersey State, other public pension funds that are right now having board meetings. And so I think this is something that is very important for the transparency of our pension fund. Thanks.
Thanks. And then I was going to answer about the 5, and then I think Mary wants to answer something just about. So we have a colleague saying, how long do you have to be before you can start getting a pension? So it's 5 years before you start getting a pension income, a retirement income, which you would get either when you retire or if you retire early, but then there's discounts that are applied to that, so it's reduced. One of the things we've been looking at is, so what happens is for the if you leave before 5 years, if you don't contribute 5 years, you just get the money back that you put in plus interest. If you stay beyond 5 years, you can also start getting some of the you can either get a retirement income or you can withdraw money and get some of the organization's contribution, and that's gradually phases in up to 10 years. Now, one of the things we're sort of interested in looking at is, why is 5 years the minimum? Now, the pension fund's doing quite well. Should we look at or do a study to see whether the 5 years is still valid or should it be slightly less, so that those who might perhaps in peacekeeping, that's a good example, can start accessing retirement income even if they don't stay with us as long as some colleagues who might stay 30 years, for example. So that's something we want to look at, and we want to get an actuarial study done. Then there's a colleague asking, can I get access a portion of my retirement before I retire? Because some people, you know, we don't live for so long after we retire. So actually you cannot, you can only start getting the money once you retire or if you take early retirement. And the reason is that the fact that you might only live a certain amount of years has already been calculated into the formula to determine to allow the pension fund to pay the benefits it does. So that's the sort of slightly morbid side of the pension fund calculation, but that's unfortunately how it is. So Mary, I'm putting you on.
Thank you, Ian. Actually, answering a question from a colleague who just wrote in the chat asking, she wants to know who we are and what we do. So I think this is an important question, because some colleagues, you know, they really don't know who we are. So as Ian mentioned in his presentation regarding the composition of the board, we are currently 6 members or 6 participants representatives, and we are now 4 members and 1 alternate. What we do is that normally we represent you at the board. We attend the board meetings. We also are members in different committees for the board. We are a member in the committee, in the budget committee. We're a member in the audit committee. We're a member in the succession planning committee, which did all this recruitment that Ian previously talked about. We're also members in the UNSPC, where we also, as Michelle said, we discuss all your cases and the disability cases. We always feel that we are there to support you and to bring fairness whenever there's a decision that needs to be taken in relation to a disability case for a participant or a beneficiary. And so this is who we are, and of course our names are known there. Now, in regard to the pension information session, which is related to the benefits, we also have been working on providing some information and sessions separately as per the request. But also we raised this issue at the board last year in 2019. 2020 we only had a virtual board meeting, but in 2019 we raised this issue, and the secretariat confirmed that we can go to them, and they have, they will be willing to hold sessions about the benefits and more information to whoever need to know better about the percentages, all the information they need. So thank you, Ian, and over to you. I just wanted to answer the colleague question. Thank you. Thank you, Ibrahima.
Ibrahim, you're on now. Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you, Mary, for answering to that question. I just want to add the fact that for the past 4 years, our main focus was on ensuring that there is accountability, because as you all know that when we were elected, the fund was facing one of its most critical crises, the crisis of processing benefit due to the implementation of the IPA system, the new technology system that the fund is now using. Our focus was first to ensure that those who were accountable of this deficiency in implementing the IPAS are held into account, and that objective was achieved 100%. As Ian has said, the then CEO and deputy CEO have left the fund, and if it was not our action within the board itself trying to call for accountability, but also involving OIOS, the investigative body of the fund, the board of auditors, and the General Assembly, this would not have been achieved. The second focus we had for the past 4 years was to ensure that there is total transparency management on how our benefit was invested, total transparency management on the way the representative of the Secretary General published the data in terms of the investment return on a monthly basis first, and that was a big struggle, but at least had for investment area to provide data in terms of our investment return on the quarterly basis, and I think there is an improvement on that area. Also, we were able to what our good friend Lowell used to say, that put fire under the feet of the managers in the investment section to make sure that their appraisal in terms of their performance are being monitored by the Secretary General. We understand that we are in a political organization, that the SG usually delegates authority on investment to his representative of the Secretary General, but because we were there to question him and to is ultimately, as the fiduciary of our investment, accountable to those he has entrusted with the authority to manage our investment accountability. We are also able to achieve that, and the Secretary General was very, very, very open to our criticism, and he has taken action twice. The first was the departure of the then representative of the Secretary General, Carol Boykin, after only 3 years at the helm of our investment. And the second was recently the departure of the then representative of the Secretary General, for whatever reason. But at least we were able to make sure that there is total accountability management in both sides, in the investment side and in the Secretariat side. That was a goal that was at heart for us, and we are happy at least to say that when we were on board 4 years ago, our fund was about 50 billion in terms of assets and weight. Now, 4 years after, we struggle within the pension board, struggle with the Secretary General on accountability of his representative. Our fund is waiting around $85 billion. And we have done a tremendous amount of work in order to achieve that, and in order to make sure that our fund is healthy. This, of course, has had a toll on us because, as you said, the vast majority of the pension boards were not in favor of our request for transparency in terms of their support to the then administration. But at least what we were able to do is to call for third parties to come, and whenever there is a need for investigation, to investigate our claim. OIS has done a tremendous job and have been also, as we were, criticized by the vast majority of the board, but at least they stood to their ultimate objective, which is to make sure that the fund is transparent, to make sure that allegations that have been put forward by the UN participant representative are duly investigated and reported back to the General Assembly and to the pension board. That also has been a key component of our achievement within the past 4 years. Now we are at the cornerstone because, as we said, that we have tried to make sure that there is a reform of the pension board due to its size. This, as Ian has said, technically the pension board is composed of 33 members, voting members. But however, we understood from participating in the board meeting that more than 93, board members, alternate, SPC, attend the pension board session. And this was a big issue for us, but also a big issue in terms of governance. And this is why we have requested in many times the General Assembly review the composition of the board. Of course, our requests have faced severe pushback from the vast majority of the pension board will believe that the board is functioning normally. But the deficiency we had in terms of the pension secretariat administration and in the investment side has showed that there was a lack of oversight in both areas of the fund. And now that OIS has already done an audit of the governance of the fund. The audit that was presented by OIS was rejected by the vast majority of the board. We went to the General Assembly, and 2 years ago, I think the GA has requested an external entity, which is a Mosaic, to provide a governance audit. And we are happy now to report that both the audit that was presented by OIS and the audit of the Mosaic report have come to the same conclusion: is the board is overweight. There is a need to significantly reduce the size of the board. And now we can understand that the General Assembly a second chance to the board due regard to the finding of OIS and the finding of the external entities to come out with a concrete proposal as to what is the optimal size of the board and how the composition of the new board would be designed. But as you know, basically there is a review of the report. The board is expected to submit to the General Assembly within the next session a concrete proposal in terms of size and composition. But we believe that if we don't ensure that there is a pragmatic solution and implemented by the General Assembly, it will be business as usual. Basically, 20 years ago, there was the same process of reviewing the size and composition of the board. It has failed, mainly because the pension board itself has refused to reinvent itself and to come out with a proposal. Now, the context is very different because this push was mainly done by the participant representative for the past 4 years. It was an uphill battle to change the composition and the size. OIS has done a fantastic job in providing a report on the size and composition that should be reviewed. We have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to an external entity to come out and provide a solution as to comparing our board with the pension plans worldwide. And we should not allow this effort to fail again, because if it does fail, what it means that we're going to be staying with an overweighted board that is incapable to exercise its fiduciary duties toward the General Assembly, toward the participant and beneficiaries. So that is the main issue that we should all have a look at and focus during the next 6 months to 1 year. Thank you. Ian, you have the floor.
May I jump in there? Sorry. Okay. In addition to what Ibrahima has said, one of the main focuses is on the number of meetings and the time actually spent. When we looked at the peers that were looked at by Mosaic, we see that board members attend about 50 meetings every year in order to properly do oversight on their board. Now, there is usually, we are not given time release, which might be something that should be looked at by the General Assembly, both the General Assembly and the Secretary General for this very important job. As I said, it's no longer a $9 billion board, it's an $80 billion board, and it does require oversight. There are many cases where people have, people in the executives or the General Assembly have conflicts and are unable to attend meetings to take care of you and to take care of our fund. And for me, this is something that should be really looked at, that the people who are being put to work on our board must have the time to properly administer our board. It is unfair to us. It is unfair to the beneficiaries. It's unfair to the fund, in that it's not getting the necessary care to grow and to grow properly and efficiently. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. And we've also had quite a few questions here, partly about taxation. So that is something that is done by each country. Some countries do not tax UN pensions, either because they've reached a host country agreement with a UN agency there. Spain's a good example. I believe in Thailand's the case, but also some countries don't tax UN pensions because they want to attract UN pensioners to come and live in the country. So if you look on the various Facebook groups of retirees, there are every now and then chats about this, but I think Spain, I think Portugal, Austria as well, if you want to go there. In Europe, at least, they have it. I know quite a few countries in Asia have it. I think Thailand, possibly Sri Lanka, and a few others. Those are some of those we've heard. But I think it's good to ask around, good to ask colleagues what they've heard about which countries. There isn't a central list because it's up to each country to determine what they do. Now, the question is about the taxability of UN pensions is that when they calculate the pensions, they actually add a bit to the pension, to your salary, and they call it the pensionable remuneration. So what they do is they take, if you're international staff, they take the salary of the New York Post adjustment. So I think that's basically the highest in the system. And then they add a certain amount, which reflects the average tax rates between the 8 headquarters duty stations. And that becomes a pensionable remuneration. So you'll see it's always higher than your actual salary. Then someone asks, if I go from P4 to P5, how does that reflect in my pension? Well, your pension will increase by the same amount. If you're locally recruited staff and then you're on a sort of national pension, they look at the tax rates within your country, and that's what they use to increase the amount to calculate the pension remuneration for your country. Questions as well about how there can be better cooperation with the HR offices and the pension fund, and that's something we keep pushing for. It's really helped bring the backlog down, but still more needs to be done. Also questions of why is it that I have to hand back the key to my office to get the pension? This is not something that the pension board has power over, or the pension fund has power over. That's the HR department in where you work who have come up with this rule, and we think it's ridiculous because who knows what happened to the key that you may have been given 10 years ago, and when did you last lock your office? And it's completely irrelevant. Also library books and things like that, and that's where we have to work with the staff unions. Need to work with the organization management representatives to take away these requirements. But the problem is, of course, is that the HR doesn't send all the documents until they don't send the final of the 3 documents until the key or the laptop or the library book has been handed in. And that's why we are pushing for, and Mary mentioned this, that as long as you send the first 2 documents in, the forms that you fill in, you should at least get some of your pension, and you shouldn't be held hostage to a missing key. Questions about ESG and SDGs. What progress has the pension fund been made to integrate ESG criteria? So this is actually in a report which is on the pension fund website. It's oim.unjspf.org. So go to the pension fund website, look up Office of Investment Management, and the report is there. As I say, they're at the beginning of integrating ESG criteria, so we're pushing for this to go much further, while of course ensuring that the pension fund continues to meet the requirement to earn 3.5% a year. It may have been easy to meet that requirement this last year because of the way the markets have gone, but it hasn't been easy to meet that requirement every year. So that remains an important concern as well. Then questions about the digital certificate of entitlement. There's been a lot actually published on that on the pension fund website. I don't know if other colleagues have questions, have something to add on that. Also about supporting those with disability, which we very much agree with. Then do US citizens pay taxes on their pension? Well, it's, we refer to the sort of US tax laws on that to look at that. Also a question about where can we find more information on ESG? Again, go on the website. There's a lot there, but again, as we said, there's more work that needs to be done. So it's very much work in progress. Can we hold more briefings? So we'd love to. I mean, the last one we did was last year. We've been very taken with the board meetings and so forth, and that's actually been. And we've been sending out emails, and we hope you've been receiving our emails in the meantime. So we've sent out quite a few of those to talk about what we're doing. Are we paid as board members? No, this is voluntary position, and we're staff. We're ordinary staff members of the UN. Is there a discussion at the board about the liberalisation of the UN workforce and the future of work? So this is, as you know, there's this talk about creating a fourth type of contract in addition to temporary, fixed term and continuing, to create an agile contract where you might not have access to the pension fund, a sort of Uber, like the taxi firm, an Uber type contract. So we're very concerned about that, because if you start converting, because the pension fund is based on an assumption that there's going to continue being people coming in and paying and contributing to the pension fund. And as soon as we start cutting that tips the pension fund into a more different territory and a more difficult situation. So definitely, if there's this growth to this new agile contract, it's not going to be good for the pension fund. But that's why we, as also in the staff unions, are pushing back very hard on these agile contracts. Someone says they've been made to understand that once you've worked for 25 years, at the end you can't contribute anymore. Actually, no, I think it's once you've accumulated at 70%. So I think that's after 30 and something years. So not 25. I think something more like 30.
May I?
Okay. Yes, go ahead,
yes,
Michelle.
So the 70%, or now it's slightly less, really is the maximum that you will get, but I don't think we have any provisions where you stop contributing once you're enrolled. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so that's good, clear. And always, if you go on the pension fund website, unjspf.org, and look on the regulations, it's explained there. It's not written in the most clear way, and we would like there to be more clarity in presenting this. So there's more transparency. Someone else asked, so how can I find out more about the pension fund's investments? So the pension fund we had to push for this as well. Sorry we didn't mention this earlier, but they weren't publishing anything about their investments. They're starting to publish on a more regular basis. I think it's every month, every couple of months. And they're starting to be a bit more transparent about what they're investing in. So that's a good thing. But we don't see why there needs to be any secret about it at all. There are much bigger pension funds than ours, and they're much more transparent than ours as well. So, and that comes back to what Michelle said as well about how board meetings should also be more transparent. There's no secrets in these board meetings, and there shouldn't be. The transparency is always the best light and the best way of keeping things clean. I don't know, Mary, if you wanted to address some. Michelle.
May I add to what you just said? Yes, there is a figure that comes out weekly on the oim.unjspf.org website on figures. However, they're not very deep. In other words, there needs to be a little more detail for the transparency so that we can see, for example, why, or the areas of fixed income that, for example, are doing poorly for the last, for some time now. So yes, while there has been improvement over the previous RSG presentation on the website, it can be much better. I mean, we'd like to know how our global equities are doing, the emerging markets, and various portfolios in the investments. As Ian says, it's much more transparent and bigger pension funds than ours, so there's no reason for the lack of transparency. Thanks.
So Mary, perhaps you would like to also look at some of the questions, putting you live now.
If you can just read any of the questions, because I don't see. I used to see, but I don't see the questions.
So there's been quite a few questions actually about from the field, precisely about how can we make sure that the colleagues in the field don't have to wait so long to get paid. Someone in Nairobi waited 4 months to get their first payment, and how can we improve the cooperation with HR and the different funds and programs?
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, this is what we have been trying to do. There are two things to be done. First, it was mentioned that we need to strengthen our HR practitioners so they know and understand better about the pension fund, the benefits, the percentages, and the forms that needs to be filled. Second, it's very important that each and every staff member, participant, have their own papers prepared and ready and up to date. So please, every time, visit your the unjspf.org, go to get your the unique ID. Make sure you have your all your documents, birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificate, anything that you have, be up to date and provided to the pension. So as we said before, we always make sure that we have no backlog and your money is paid after separation 30 days maximum. In many cases, the delays happen because some of the information are missing, or the staff member or the participant is not aware of the full package that needs to be submitted to the pension fund to be processed so you get your money on time. And this is what's not acceptable, is that you have to wait for months and months. And Ian, you mentioned that some people waited for maybe 9 months, but once we started in 2016, we had people waiting for 3 years and more without getting their money. So we are always here for you in case you face any problem. Please contact us. The other issue is that you go and visit the website, the unjspf.org. Get familiar before you separate. Get in touch with your HR colleagues. In case you face any problem, we are always there for you, and then we can support you. But our main aim is that you get your money wherever you are, in the field, in a headquarters, anywhere you are, wherever you are, you can get your money, because this is your benefits that you have to get on time. So I hope I was able to answer. Yes, Michelle, please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to add to that a little. Additionally, so for those of you who separate or for separation cases and for waiting on your benefit, I mean, we have been advocating for the last 4 years regarding this partial payment. I'm not sure why the administration is pushing back on this. This is so that you can get 80% of the money that was already received in the fund and is sitting in your account. And therefore, as long as you provide your payment instructions and your identification to show that you are the person who is entitled to this benefit, there really should be no reason. In fact, again, we came to an agreement last week that we would be reviewing this in the UNSPC. However, already the management is pushing back and reminding us of why the board said it was too much work for the administration to do in order to provide this partial payment. In fact, I can guarantee you that it is minimal additional, and the benefit to the participant is much more than the minute or two that it will take extra for this to be done. Okay, so we are going to keep pushing for this partial payment so that people are not left in the lurch. Additionally, those people for the forfeitures, for those people who have left their money for more than 3 or 5 years, depending on the rule, the money goes on the forfeiture track. The benefit goes on the forfeiture track. And we have been advocating that the pension fund posts this escheatment list just like the UNFCU does, without your confidential information, but with your name and perhaps duty station, so that any of your friends can see that you're there and need to be contacted. Okay, I mean, while right now the process is that they go through the HR offices, as you can imagine, the HR office is concerned with people who are there now, and they have their hands full with active staff. So to put this additional burden on them is, for me, it's unreasonable, especially when the UN pays the pension fund as the local secretariat to do some of this work. So it's not like, oh, you pay me and then I send the work back to you. So if the fund were to create on its own website this list, then I think more people will be found. And we've been asking for this even before we got here to the board. We were asking from this came out of the unions. This came out of the secretariat unions, this request for the achievement list. So let's hope that the snafu that happened a couple of weeks ago, where somebody posted, confidential information, does not now prevent the pension fund from just doing the right thing and posting the names without the confidential information. Over, Ian. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle and Mary. So we actually had over 400 questions, so there's a lot to go through. So we're trying to answer as many as we can. We've had thanks also for the message of support. It's very nice to get those and to see that we're making a difference. Someone asked if they can pull out their money prior to retiring. You can't. It's not like one of these second pillar or third pillar things where you can take some money out and put it towards your mortgage. The money stays in until the point where you leave the organization. That's because we're a defined benefit fund, so it's based on final salary. A few questions about what happens if there's missing years. If you go away and then come back, can you contribute those missing years? Yes, you can, but you have to do so in a very short amount of time. I think it's within 1 year. But the thing is, as soon as you get back into work, you should immediately contact the pension fund and ask how to do it, because they do keep a record and they're very strict about that deadline. Questions about...
May I answer that on leave without pay? Yes, so once you're going on leave without pay, you must make arrangements at the beginning to make contributions while you're out. Of course, once you leave, if you were to take your money, you can restore your benefit, your contributions and your contributory service, but at that point you must do so within a year of rejoining the organization. So on leave without pay, you need to make the arrangement ahead of time to make contributions concurrently with your leave. This, by the way, is not always advantageous. It depends on the length of time you've already served and stuff. So because in this case, you need to pay your own as well as the two parts that the UN would have paid otherwise. So it does become expensive. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Another question that perhaps you could answer is about the cost of living adjustment. How does that kick in, and is it automatic?
Yes. Okay. So the cost of living adjustment happens every few years once the CPI in the country goes above a certain level. For most benefits, it's paid according to the US CPI, and it has generally come like every 2 to 3 years that there is a cost of living adjustment. Once you're receiving a pension, you automatically receive it.
Okay, thank you. And then we've had questions. Okay, practical question about the recording. So yes, you'll be able to access, I think, from tomorrow, using the same link, you should be able to access the recording for this. We had a question about what happened with the General Assembly saga when we gave our views as board members to the General Assembly. The General Assembly oversees the board and takes the final decisions, and is obviously very interested to hear what board members think about what's been happening at the board. So we did engage with General Assembly delegates. What happened then was that the board chair went to the General Assembly and accused us of all kinds of things and saying we weren't behaving properly and we were naughty children and we shouldn't have been speaking to General Assembly. actually that led to more General Assembly delegates coming to ask us about what's going on at the board. So I think it worked in our favour, it worked in your favour as well. Someone's asked about the permanent remote way of working. Will that have an impact on the pension? Because what happens if you're in a low post adjustment duty station? It doesn't actually have any difference. This is for international staff. It doesn't make any difference because it's based on if you're local staff on where you're actually recruited from or where you're based. If you're international staff, the pension is based on the pensionable remuneration, which is based on New York. And thanks for pointing out that New York is not the highest post adjustment, that Switzerland is slightly higher. Also, can there be some way of doing virtual appointments with the pension fund administration? So that's something we'll look into to push them a bit for that. Again, it's this whole getting feedback and this feeling that waiting times have not need to come down. Michelle, you want to come
down? Someone is asking if you can please speak a little slower. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. The question also about what's happening with the derivatives. We mentioned this in our broadcast at the beginning of the year. So the General Assembly did put restrictions to how these could be used and said that this would be done on a pilot basis. So we're closely monitoring that. We've also calling for certain studies to be made into the risks of all this, because we are concerned as well. We understand that the fund wants to be looking at different ways of investing, but we're also concerned at the risk that brings about. So we're asking for studies to be done on that, and we'll be bringing that up in the board as necessary. Another question about temporary appointments. Does service on temporary appointments count? I believe the first 6 months of your first temporary appointment does not count, but after that it does count. Michelle, am I correct on that?
Yeah, so it depends on the length. If you are immediately employed on a 6-month contract, you're immediately put on in the fund. However, if you say start on a 3-month contract and a second 3-month contract, it's not until you get to the 6 months that you will start contributing to the pension fund. So it depends on the length of the contract.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Then we have about same-sex marriages. How is that recognized by the pension fund? So the pension fund doesn't make a distinction. It simply is that if your spouse is registered with your organization, and it has to be done before you retire. So if at the time of retiring you have a spouse, then that person is in the system as well when it comes to retirement, and therefore should you die before, then the spouse would get the, should you sadly die first, then the spouse would get the widow's entitlement. Ibrahim, would you like to add some things?
Just we want also to take this occasion to thank the staff of the pension fund who have been working diligently, most of them from their home, to ensure that there is no disruption in the benefit processing. I think this is always the occasion to thank the staff of the fund and the management also. I think one of the greatest achievements of due to the COVID-19 is to show its ability to reinvent itself, its ability to have in place policy in terms of benefit processing that can be done from remotely as well as from the office. So I think this is the year to really thank the staff of the fund for the effort and for making sure that despite the pandemic implication in terms of not being able to work from the office in New York and Geneva, there has been no significant disruption in the benefit processing and in servicing our clients worldwide. And this has to be recognized, and the participant representative always recognize the work and the effort of the staff of the fund. Thank you, Michelle. Ian.
Thank you, well said. Mary, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you, Ian. I just was reading a question from a colleague that says, can a staff member change the pension fund beneficiaries? And if it's mandatory to share a portion with a spouse, and dependents. So I think Michelle is smiling because this question came up a lot during the past few years, and you cannot change your beneficiaries because the dependents, your dependents, are your beneficiaries. And Michelle, of course, you can correct me if I'm mistaken. Until your children reach the age of 18, they will no more be entitled to be as beneficiaries. The spouse will be entitled for this. So no possibility of changing beneficiaries. And someone asked about the monthly the yearly statements. It's there. It's on the website. Once you use your unique ID, you can just access your annual document, and then you can get even the estimation. And just for you to know that the estimation are always accurate, so that the amounts you get there are the correct ones that you can get. So yeah, thank you, Ian. Over to you.
Can I just say that the beneficiaries, definitely for people who have dependents, are in accordance with the regulations. The spouse, or in the case of certain years, there can be up to 4 widows who divide, who share the widow's benefit. It's not that, the more people, the more wives that someone has, the more benefits they're actually getting. The benefit is divided, and the children receive up to age 20, children up to age 21. Now, there are cases, of course, where there is no dependent and no dependents, and therefore this falls under Article 37, which provides for beneficiaries who you can change. I mean, I know this may not have been the real question, but for single people without beneficiaries, without dependents, they can fill out that A2 designation of beneficiary form, and you can leave your contributions, etc., to whomever you wish. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. And then we have a couple more questions. Yes, is the fund investing in natural resource extraction in conflict areas? So it's a very good question. This is kind of information we're trying to get hold of. It's something that's also not always easy to get hold of, because there's the company that does the mining, and then there's the companies that then buy from the company that does the mining. So if we look at, for example, some of the rare earth minerals that get mined in some of these places, what we have is then that they end up in batteries, and they end up in Teslas and iPhones, which are stocks that are generally seen as green. Tesla is an eco car, right? It's an electric car, so it's seen as a green investment. But at the same time, the minerals used to make it may come from conflict areas, but certainly have an environmental degradation in their mining. So this is one of the complicated areas, and one of the discussions we're having is how do you measure for that, and what do you say? How do you rank that? Certainly, we don't want to be getting things from conflict areas. At the same time, we find inadvertently that the fund has invested in things like Tesla and all that because they're green, but they may have those, but they may have elements that come from very inappropriate sources. So that's one of the things we're looking at, and it's something that's going to continue posing challenges, I think, for time to come. But we certainly want to improve the fund from where it is now. We've also had more questions about green card holders. I think we answered that, about taxes and things like that, about special leave without pay. And yeah, so we're coming close to time. I'll hand back to Ibrahima now.
Thank you, Michelle. I wish to take this opportunity to thank everyone that participated in this information session briefing. We want also to inform that the meeting has been recorded and will be available within the next 24 hours in the same link you have from the invitations. And We look forward to in the near future in order to make sure that we, as participant representative representing your interests in the pension board, continue to abide by our fiduciary responsibility to keep you informed and abreast of the changes that your pension fund is going through. Thank you again for joining us and for participating in this information session. See you next time. Bye, and stay safe and well during this trying time. Thank you. Michelle, you have something to add?
No,
I see.
just saying bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.